of history.
Alright, so the last episode of Ancient Sexuality, we only got up to prehistory, so we didn't even actually get into the ancient world. I mean, it's ancient as far as it's actual old, but according to, pointy headed professors, the ancient world, that's prehistory. The ancient world, that's the world in which you have history, so you have writing. So we're going to start tackling that now. So we're going to truck into Egypt, and we have a long period of history to deal with in Egypt. So we're going to have to compress elements of it a bit. Also, we have different social levels, and different social levels have different power within the society. Poor women, for example, have little power, but rich women have more power than most men. Okay, so social position being very important. Um, we have in Egypt probably the single most egalitarian society in the Mediterranean. Okay, it's the place where women and men have the most equal rights, equal capabilities, but because of social constraints that are placed on women, they're going to have some issues with that. But it's by far, this is going to be one of the best places we visit. There is evidence of misogyny. Okay. There's a Hatshepsut graffito in her. Uh, it's actually inside the tomb. It's within a wall that wouldn't actually be accessible, and it's a painted on the wall of this interior cavity. She was very sexually ambiguous because of her role. Okay, and she was pharaoh. And even though women had held the position of pharaoh, it had usually been as a caretaker. Okay, women such as Cameronebti in the Old Kingdom, she was an insanely powerful woman who essentially she made pharaohs. Um, but Hatshepsut's ruling on her own. Okay, she's not using a big dumb guy as a stalking horse and running Egypt. Okay, and she's only gives up power at the end of her life to her son Thutmose the Third. Okay, even after long after he achieved his majority. Okay, so that's an example there. It's an example. So how can we apprehend sexuality? First of all, we're gonna go to some evidence, baby. Laws. What's illegal and what is illegal? Okay, and we're gonna get at this is really because you don't have laws without people having done something to create the need to have that law in the first place. Now, there's a reason that they say, don't eat the cellophane on the plastic bag is not edible, okay? Because somebody tried to eat a plastic bag. Maybe it was a baby, who knows? But somebody tried, okay? Wasn't me though. Then we're going to look at instruction books. Okay, in the last video, I talked about the instruction of Amenemope. There's a lot of other different instruction books, and these deal not so much with legal things, but with traditions and social norms and social behavior. Okay, webs of culture that are orthodox and true and acceptable. And the Egyptians are a society in which um, Egyptian society is through what the picture we get through these instruction books is definitely one in which there is a norm and it is pushed real hard. And then third, we're going to look at art. Okay, lots and lots and lots of art. How are men and women depicted? Okay, the Hatshepsut graffito, I already talked about that. We're talking about sex and power and degeneration of women, the important women, the queen, okay, the pharaoh. But it could be just as easily, hey, she's hot and I'd fuck her. Okay, I mean, we don't know. I'm going to be honest. I've heard that a million times working at UPS, and the guy who drew this graffito, he was evidently not put off by Hatshepsut's sexually ambiguous statuary or the fact that she was wearing a fucking horsehair beard and dressing like a man. Okay, that did not put him off in the least. All right, so Egyptian legal sources. Okay, the earliest legal records we got go back to the Old Kingdom, so 3000 BC to 2500 so BC, somewhere in there. Women even at this early juncture had legal equality, but socially and economically they were not always men's equals. They had different social rules and capabilities. So I'd like to read a little bit from a document, an article by Janet H. Johnson from 2002 from the Oriental Institute in Chicago. It's part of the University of Chicago, and it's called "Women's Legal Rights in Ancient Egypt." It's from the Fathom Archive. Okay, and it says from our earliest preserved records in the Old Kingdom on. The formal legal status of Egyptian women, whether unmarried, married, divorced, or widowed, was nearly identical with that of Egyptian men. Differences in social status between individuals are evident in almost all products of this ancient culture, its arts, its texts, its archaeological record. In the textual record, men were distinguished by the type of job they held and from which they derived status, clout, and income. But most women did not hold jobs, though some did. Okay, though some did. Women are also frequently identified by giving the name and titles of their husband or father, from whom presumably they derived their social status. Thus, the New Kingdom literary text entitled "The Instructions of a Man," from any state, a woman is asked about her husband, a man is asked about his rank. Okay? But in the legal arena, both women and men could act on their own and were responsible for their own actions. This is in sharp contrast with some other ancient societies, that is, ancient Greece, where women did not have their own legal identity and were not allowed to own real property. And in order to participate in the legal system, always had to work through a male, usually their closest male relative, father, brother, husband, son, who was called their lord. Great, huh? Egyptian women were able to acquire and to own and to dispose of property, both real and personal, in their own name. They could enter into contracts in their own name. They could initiate civil court cases and could likewise be sued. They could serve as witnesses in court cases. They could serve on juries, and they could witness legal documents. That women very rarely did serve on juries or act as witnesses to legal documents is a result of social factors, not legal ones. So remember what we said, okay? Society. Okay, society is the super huge element to this. You can have lots. So what and this is where we get into the business of gender, because this has nothing to do with biological sex or one group of people being weaker than the other, or any bullshit that you hear from the alt-right. That is not what's going on here. Okay, this has to do with the creation of gender roles. All right, so for we can get an example from this for the instructions of Tahotep preserved in the Middle Kingdom, and later copies. A man's wife is seen basically as a dependent of whom it behooves him to take good and loving care. When you prosper and found your house, and love your wife with ardor, fill her belly, clothe her back, ointments soothe her body, gladden her heart as long as you live. She is a fertile field for her lord. But next comes a jarring statement. Do not contend with her in court. Keep her from power. Restrain her. Her eye is her storm where she gazes, or when she gazes. Thus will you make her stay in your house. Okay, so this business of contending with one's wife in court clearly indicates that women had legal rights and were willing to fight for them and exercise them, if I may say. This distinction between legal status of women in ancient Egypt and their public or social status is of major importance in understanding how the Egyptian system actually worked. All right, that is the beginning of this thing. Okay, this is a long article, not super long, but it's fantastic. It has a chapter on Egyptian civil law, property, marriage and family law, annuity contracts, and divorce. So lots of fantastic stuff in here. Um, Divorce and remarriage were common in ancient Egypt at all periods, and contention between siblings and half siblings for property was quite frequent. Frequent. Um, Seem to be relatively easy and relatively common. There's little convincing evidence for polygamy, except by the pharaoh, but extensive evidence for serial monogamy, definitely. Either party could divorce a spouse on any grounds, or basically without grounds, without any interest or record on the part of the state. Um, the vocabulary that is used is the left a man left or abandoned a woman went away from the man or left a woman. And interestingly, what you end up starting to find is that there are going to be laws introduced about women and men coming from other towns and cities where they because they're not from around here. And why are they here? Well, because they went away from the town that they lived in, and they've come to a new town because socially and they are not. They have violated some elements of that town in such a way that they leave. They can't participate in it in the same way that they had before. All right, so Janet Johnson's article, a very good summary, nice evidence pieces to demonstrate men and women in law and life, marriage, life, divorce, death, inheritance, birth, children. As I said, he's a good kitty. Um, Good law court records preserved and give us very detailed glimpses of Egyptian life. Women had legal power, but they did not have necessarily the corresponding social power. All right, so let's note the stark changes in gender and power occurring from the transition from the prehistoric, that would be what we saw in the last video, to the historic. That was where we have written evidence. Okay, the legal status of women may be equal, but the social and community status is declining. Okay, in Mesopotamia and Greece, it will collapse, and the status of women in society will pretty much stay there until we get to the 20th century. And really, it's still not. It's still not equal. Think about that. Okay. Okay. So looking at the other Egyptian sources, we've got that instruction of the Menemopi coming from the Ramesside period, somewhere in 1300 to 1075 BC. It's important to understand this thing as it meant as a text to be read and transmitted from a father to a son, an heir to a position. So it's distinctly male point of view. And it addresses how men treat people. And scholars have said this kind of emphasis on personal responsibility for actions, the repercussions of those actions is characteristic and distinctive in the early New Kingdom period, and that's entirely possible. But more generally, it adheres to this idea of ma'at, or balance. Okay, so it is most definitely in there, and honestly, there's really only one specific reference to women, and it's reference to um, uh, don't move the boundary stones of widows. So basically, don't steal land away from widows. So it's not. There's not a lot of stuff in here. There's nothing in here about how to treat your wife, or how to treat your girlfriend, or to your daughter, or your mother, or anything like that. Other than these these rules of basic behavior, balance. Don't fight with the angry man in the marketplace. Um, don't cheat. Don't steal. Um, don't be too angry. Don't be too sad. Don't be too happy. Those kinds of things. So it's an extremely moderation bound approach to life. So the and there's only, as I said, there's only one reference to women. So that's a Menemopi. Okay, so let's take a look at some art. So we have a whole bunch of possibilities here. We have lots of family scenes. We have lots of divine scenes. We have Hatshepsut. We have Nefertiti. And we have Cameron. So we've got three powerful women. We've got some goddesses and gods. And we've got some family scenes. So in the family scenes, as we are, first of all, conventions about Egyptian art. Um, though it sort of looks realistic and it does look like comic book art, and the fact is there's some serious conventions. Displaying the proportions of the body, displaying all bits and pieces of the body so you can see all the toes and all the fingers, even though it would be impossible to really stand like that or really awkward. That's a thing. Um, Further, height is indicative of power. Okay, so you can have when you have alterations in height or differences in height, it doesn't have anything to do with their actual physical size. There are some exceptions to that. There are some really, really, really realistic, or they seem realistic, um, depictions of families. And so here's one of them right here, where you this looks like the height differences is probably real, but then there's other ones where it's not. Okay, so here's some key situations where you can see men and women in their social roles and the height differences. Okay, we take a look at the divine scenes, and guess what? The height differences disappear. And why? Because these are all divine beings. Okay, and they're all of equal power. And here they are. Here's a bunch of divine beings, and we can look at that. So let's then talk about some queens here. Okay, and the reason we're going to talk about the queens, these particular ones, is because well, we have really good statuary. Okay, really good evidence for them. So first one we're going to talk about is Hatshepsut. She's 1479 to 1458 BC. She's depicted in a very plastic manner. That is, her gender image changes all over the place. Okay, she starts the beginning of her reign. She's appearing as a man. She's got the fake horse hair beard on. She's all of her feminine features are toned way down. And then as she grows into her pharaonic power, she begins to have a lot more um, female kinds of um, elements. Her face softens. She gets these little breasts. And then we have the famous graffito of her having dog style sex uh, inside the tomb of her own tomb. Okay, so the workman put this in there, so the that's a pretty nasty piece of graffito there, but it's not particularly ugly. It's just a pornographic picture of somebody having sex with the pharaoh. The second queen we can look at, Nefertiti, 1370 to 1330 BC. Her first statues, when she's early on in her career as queen, as Amenhotep IV's queen, she's tiny. And you can see this, she's only comes up to his knee in this statue. So what that indicates isn't that she's tiny, it indicates power, of course. Okay. However, after she becomes number one royal wife, all of a sudden she's much bigger. And then all of a sudden she's just as tall as he is. And there's a lot of exploration as to why the royal couple are portrayed the way they are, because the Amarna imagery, the statuary, and the bas reliefs are incredibly intimate. Some of the stuff that I'm showing you here, you don't see this kind of stuff in Egypt. It's really, really amazing. Okay, so that's Nefertiti. It's important to understand She was a supporter of Akhenaten's new religion. Okay, she was the mother of the heir, Tutankhamun. All right, so she fulfilled all of the main female social roles perfectly. Okay, in addition, she was incredibly beautiful and renowned for her beauty. So her beauty is well attested in other sources. Um, and the statuary bears it out as well as we can tell. Okay, so that was also an important thing. Of course, females having physical beauty. The third and final queen we got here is Cameronepti the second. She was a powerful old kingdom woman, pharaoh, uh, married to her brother Menkari. She's about 2600 to 2550 BC, so she's much earlier. Like she's almost 1,000 years earlier than Hatshepsut. Okay, so that's how much time separates these people, these women. Now she's this business of marrying your brother into the royal family mom and dad are doing this as well. The reason is to um, keep the royal line inside a single family because it's a matrilineal descent. So who mom marries is really important. So you have to keep mom in the mother of the heir, the future heir, in the family line. So at this point, that kind of stuff goes away eventually. But in the Old Kingdom, you see it a lot, and that's what's going on here. So she produces the mother, the pharaoh, the next pharaoh. Okay, um, so we look at her in this image, and she is an enormously powerful woman. She is fully equally the height of the pharaoh, and her arms when she is putting her arm around him and she is holding him like that, it's not just a loving embrace. This indicates that this is a sort of support, physical, not just the physical support here is fuck. The fuck am I trying to say? This is she is putting her economic, her social, her political uh, capital um, behind this guy. So yeah, there you go. All right, so there we go. We can see how equality or sexual egalitarianism, if you want to call it, we can see it throughout Egypt. So this is really good. It's really good. Good evidence. Probably a million fucking holes in it, but there you go. Speaking of Mesopotamia, let's talk about it. First of all, like Egypt, it's big. But unlike Egypt, it's not a uniform culture. Okay, it's Mesopotamia is a geographic expression. It just means between the two rivers. That's it. So we're gonna choose the city-state of Babylon as representative of Mesopotamian sexual culture. Representative means we can take it as being, let's call the baseline. Is that true? I don't know. But archaeologically, it has the best preserved law code, and lots of people today have heard of it, so it works well for our purposes. So we're kind of assuming something here. Let us suppose it is representative of several Mesopotamian city states and their sexual culture. Okay, so a bit about the law code first. Okay. In the same way we did with Egypt, we're going to look at law as a way to see what the boundaries of behavior between people was. So Hammurabi's law code is written somewhere around 1754 BC. It's written on a stone stele and on clay tablets. A stele is just simply an upright standing block It could be of wood, and oftentimes it's of stone, and they can be markers for all sorts of types of things. And so this could be put up in the marketplace, could be put up anywhere. It has 282 laws with punishments based on social status. There are three social classes in Babylon during this period when Hammurabi was king: the Amilu, who are the elites, uh, the Muskanu, or the free men, and the Ardu, or the slaves. It is one of many law codes which existed in Mesopotamia and have actually survived to this time. There's the Code of Ur-Nammu, king of Ur, 2050 BC, so predating Hammurabi's law code by 300 years. The law code of Ashuna, 1930 BC, 200 years earlier. And the code of Lipit Ishtar of Issia, and Isin, Isin. That's 1870 BC. So that's 50 years, 100 years older. Okay, um, this is retributive law. Okay, what you did is done to you. So retribution is the heart of it. It's not about learning from your mistakes, and it's not about uh, re rebirth from your criminal past. It's about punishment in public where you are mutilated or dead or pay a substantial fine. So you're really an example to others through paying out whatever with your life or your limb or your nose, or a branding, or being thrown into the river, or uh, paying large fines to clear illegal issues. That's how it's done. The laws are arranged in groups, um, generally domestic types of things, including marriage and divorce. Um, Contracts, tons of contracts, lots of slavery laws, duties of workers, liability. Okay, so this is a heavily litigious society, and crime. There are no lawyers, so the accusers and the defendant stand before the magistrate. Evidence and witnesses can be produced. Presumption of innocence seems to be present. Okay, seems to be present. However, it also has to be said that the laws are graded according to social rank. The punishments of the elites towards the lower orders are much less onerous than the punishments of free people or slaves versus the elites. So, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to read to you some of these laws and then see what the fuck we think of them. Alright? Let's give it a whirl. Speaking of Mesopotamia, let's talk about it. First of all, like Egypt, it's big, but unlike Egypt, it's not a uniform culture. Okay, it's Mesopotamia is a geographic expression. It just means between the two rivers. That's it. So we're gonna choose the city-state of Babylon as representative of Mesopotamian sexual culture. Representative means we can take it as being, let's call the baseline. Is that true? I don't know. But archaeologically, it has the best preserved law code, and lots of people today have heard of it, so it works well for our purposes. So we're kind of assuming something here. Let us suppose it is representative of several Mesopotamian city states and their sexual culture. Okay, so a bit about the law code first. Okay, in the same way we did with Egypt, we're going to look at law as a way to see what the boundaries of behavior between people was. So Hammurabi's law code is written somewhere around 1754 BC. It's written on a stone stele and on clay tablets. A stele is just simply an upright standing block. It could be of wood, and oftentimes it's of stone, and they can be markers for all sorts of types of things. And so this could be put up in the marketplace, could be put up anywhere. It has 282 laws with punishments based on social status. There are three social classes in Babylon during this period when Hammurabi was king. The Amilu, who are the elites, uh, the Muskanu, or the free men, and the Ardu, or the slaves. It is one of many law codes which existed in Mesopotamia and have actually survived to this time. There's the Code of Ur-Nammu, King of Ur, 2050 BC, so predating Hammurabi's law code by 300 years. The law code of Ashuna, 1930 BC, 200 years earlier. And the code of Lipit Ishtar of Issia, and Isin, Isin. That's 1870 BC. So that's 50 years, 100 years older. Okay, um, this is retributive law. Okay, what you did is done to you. So retribution is the heart of it. It's not about learning from your mistakes, and it's not about uh, re rebirth from your criminal past. It's about punishment in public where you are mutilated or dead or pay a substantial fine. So you're really an example to others through paying out whatever with your life or your limb or your nose or a branding or being thrown into the river or uh, paying large fines to clear illegal issues. That's how it's done. The laws are arranged in groups, um, generally domestic types of things, including marriage and divorce. Um, Contracts, tons of contracts, lots of slavery laws, duties of workers, liability. Okay, so this is a heavily litigious society, and crime. There are no lawyers, so the accusers and the defendant stand before the magistrate. Evidence and witnesses can be produced. Presumption of innocence seems to be present. Okay, seems to be present. However, it also has to be said that the laws are graded according to social rank. The punishments of the elites towards the lower orders are much less onerous than the punishments of free people or slaves versus the elites. So, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to read to you some of these laws and then see what the fuck we think of them. Alright? Let's give it a whirl. Okay, so to get a flavor of the law code, there's certain like must read laws. And so I'm going to lead off with 196, 197, and 198, and 199 because those really are the ones that are the most famous. And so 196 reads, if a free person puts out the eye of another free person, that person's eye shall be put out. That's the eye for an eye. 197, if a free person breaks the bone of another free person, that person's bone shall be broken. 198, if a free person puts out the eye or breaks the bone of a civil servant, that person shall pay 1/2 kilo of silver. 199, if a free person puts out the eye or breaks the bone of another free person's slave, that person shall pay half the value of the slave. Okay, so interesting. We have, you can see the levels of society at work there. So, and that's, you can also see the retribution as being the base coat of this thing here. All right. So then we go to 195. If a son strikes his father, his hand shall be cut off. Okay? And that's a, boy, is that a social uh, uh, restriction right there. Not that striking people is a good idea, but you're going to lose your hand for something like that. Then let's skip down to 205. Okay. If a free person's slave strikes the cheek of another free person, the ear of the slave shall be cut off. So this is this business of mutilation done in public, so that whenever that slave or that person walks into a marketplace or any place, they immediately know what happened. You know what the punishment for what is. Uh, and then we have 282. If a slave says to the master, "You are not my master," the master shall cut off the slave's ear. Okay, so this business of mutilation by ear cutting, so there's, unless you're wearing like a really heavy hat, and even then, you're gonna be able to tell that you don't have an ear. You're gonna be able to tell you don't have a hand. 138. If a man wishes to divorce his wife who has no children, he must pay her a settlement equal to the value of the gifts he gave her father when they were married, plus the dowry she brought from her father's house. By paying the settlement, he divorces her. So this essentially, then, this is something where it's contractual. Okay, and we can see by a lot of these Mesopotamian laws that a lot of this stuff is contractual. Um, 141. If a freeman's wife wishes to divorce him, the man may divorce her and give her no settlement. If the man does not wish to divorce her, he may marry another woman and keep his first wife in his house as a slave. Whoosh. That's pretty terrifying. If a woman wishes to divorce her husband and refuses him sexual rights, an inquiry shall be held. If she has not committed adultery, but her husband has, she may take her dowry and return to her father's house. If she has committed adultery, then she shall be executed by being thrown into the water. In other words, they bind her up and throw her into the river and drown her. So in one situation, he's sent she's sent home, and in the other situation, she's killed. If a free man has sexual relations with his daughter, that man shall be exiled. Okay? So incest is exiled. If a free man has sexual relations with his mother after the death of his father, both of them shall be executed by burning. If a free man has sexual relations with his father's first wife, who is the mother of sons after the death of his father, that man shall lose his paternal inheritance. If the first wife and a female slave of a free man both bear him sons, and the father acknowledges the sons of the female slave as his own, then the sons of the female slave shall share equally with the sons of the first wife in the paternal inheritance after the death of the father. Okay, so there is an enormous amount of weight given to the male in all of this. Uh, the laws are disproportionately weighted in the favor of men, and definitely in the favor of men of upper class. Let's see. Any of others? All right. So I think as far as that we're concerned, as far as the reading of them, that makes sense. That's about enough. That's we kind of get the sense here. There's some pretty hairy parameters there on this. I mean, look, your women, while they have some right to petition in court, and if they do these things, they're you, she's the one. Uh, If a woman wishes to divorce her husband and he refuses him sexual rights, that's the she can go home with that one. But if Freeman's wife wishes to divorce him, the man may divorce her and give her no settlement. If the man does not wish to divorce her, he may marry another woman and keep his first wife in his house as a slave. Oh my God, that's insane. So if she wants a divorce and he says no, he can marry somebody else and keeps her as a slave. Okay, so that's way different than Egypt. All right. Okay, so we also should note there's no mention of homosexuality or anything like that in any of these things. Um, so let's see. In some of these other law codes, as well as Hammurabi's, we can see women can initiate divorce, but it's considered socially disgraceful, and they frequently leave. If they're not killed or become a slave, or they flee, they escape. Um, they become voluntary exiles. They show up as foreign women in other cities' law codes. And in our old buddy Herodotus from the last video has something to say on Babylon and sex and women. He says, young unmarried women had to sit outside the temple of Ishtar and have sex with any man who chose her. The thing is, virginity, that is not having sex before marriage, was considered a prerequisite for marriage at any social level. So this is probably Herodotus Tolstoy being told, hey, they make their young women have sex with anyone in that temple. And he was like, really? Wow. So I have my doubts about whether or not that's actually true. This is perhaps, part of whole Said's Orientalism. The East as a place of sexual excess, deviance, and aberrance. Um, we can see some of the erotic beliefs from Babylon. Okay, we have Julia Santi's PhD thesis from Columbia University from 2000, The Erotic Reliefs of Ancient Mesopotamia. Reliefs which you can see some of right here are made of terracotta and lead, interestingly, and were ubiquitous in southern Mesopotamian homes. Asante goes on. She goes after Herodotus, as it were, arguing that all this biz about orgiastic rights for unmarried women of antiquity were basically BS. The presence of the plaques in homes, she argues, is a series of magical touchstones that the family might observe or use in daily life or perhaps on special occasions. Similar use evidence to Gimbutas. What are these things that depict in these cases, there's the sex act instead of to Buddhists, it was the goddesses, the Venus figures. Explain them, okay? And a lot of the scholars we're going to look at are like this. They're seizing on these really weird pieces of art, and which looks to us pornographic, and then explaining it which, hurrah, thank you. Okay, who the fuck did I think I was kidding that this was going to be done in 2 episodes? It's not. So this is just the second part. So we stop here, and we'll pick it up on episode 3 of Ancient Sexuality, where we finally get to the Greeks. Thank you for listening if you made it this far. Donate if you can. Good night, you lovely people.